Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here again with Joe. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Perch. How are you?
I'm doing great. We have the great pleasure to talk to Carl Potts, who's been a kind of legend in this industry, touching a lot of different characters in comics. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good, thank you.
I've been very excited to talk to you for a number of different reasons. And I was talking to Joe earlier. I think there's always kind of different people have different favorites of what you've done. I'm very excited to talk to you about certainly Alien Legion, and that was a comic I absolutely love. But there's been a lot you've done, and so I wanted to just kind of ask you to start out. How did you come to get into comics? What caused you to do it?
Like a lot of people that got into comics, I grew up reading them and really enjoyed them, and I was always drawing. I don't know if I can remember a time when I wasn't drawing, even as a toddler. I had a crayon in my hand usually, or something like that. And some point in high school, it finally occurred to me that there's people who make a living doing this. But I thought, they're 3,000 miles away. I was growing up in the Bay Area in California.
Yeah.
So I didn't really take it seriously. Then when I went to college, the counselor there was talking to me about, what track I should take. And I had three different things I was really interested in. One was drawing. One was science, particularly marine sciences and aquatic sciences in general, like theology. And the other was music. So he goes, I see you're in the band. We'll make you a music major. So I spent the first quarter, that school did quarters instead of semesters, as a music major. And I was in a band. It was mandatory if you lived in California to be in a band.
Oh, sure.
I thought, why didn't this guy tell me about this commercial art track that they had? Because that looks pretty neat. I think I have a better chance of making a living at that as I do as a musician. So I ended up switching over to that. I never lost my interest in aquatic sciences. And to this day, I'm always keeping aquariums, breeding fish, going fishing,
Nice.
all that stuff when I can. I wonder sometimes, like if back then it was possible to clone yourself, if I could have had a couple of clones and each one of us would have taken a different track and see
a very comic book concept there.
what would have happened. Yeah.
I'm interested to kind of talk through your career and kind of how you get into things. But one other piece I wanted to throw out at the beginning, because you mentioned kind of these different interests. One of the things that your name pops up on a lot is there's a lot of creators who credit you as being kind of the teacher, the person who they credit their success for. And really big names. I think Jim Lee has mentioned many times that you were really kind of the crux of why he's successful, or not why he's successful, but how he got to the table.
Right.
Art Adams has made those comments. June Brigman, Mike Mignola, just a number of names who credit you as being a mentor. And I'm curious, how did you adopt to that role?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think I must at some point that early on just developed a knack and a drive to teach and be a mentor. That's a lot of what I do today. I teach at School of Visual Arts in New York, and I teach online for a number of other schools scattered around. But when I got asked to join Marvel's editorial staff, there were a couple of artists that I knew that hadn't really got a shot at the big time, and now I was in a position to do that. So I gave them a shot. But on my very first day as an editor, I inherited this stack of unanswered submissions, art submissions that came into Marvel by the ton every day. And the editor I was replacing was a friend of mine, Al Milgram, who was going freelance. And So we're plowing through this stack of stuff because he doesn't want to leave me with the whole pile without him and I going through it. And one of the first packages I open up is from Art Adams. And it was a really nice Wolverine drawing, and it looked pretty good. So I started working with Art, and my assistant editor was Ann Vicente, and at some point I showed Art's work to her, and she'd been talking about this crazy character idea she'd had for Longshot, and it just kind of took off from there. And what happened is I remembered what I was like when I was sending in my samples, my unsolicited samples, and you'd either never get a response, or you'd get one ages later that had a form letter attached that didn't tell you anything useful. If you're lucky, someone might have handwritten some little note before they signed it. And I just felt that as an editor, I didn't want to do that to people, just leave them hanging or not give them any useful information. So I made a vow to myself that anybody who sent their work directly to me, not to Marvel in general, but to my office, they'd get a prompt response, and it would tell them something useful. And so fortunately, it took up a lot of time, but fortunately, most art samples have the same 3 or 4 general weaknesses so I could eventually craft a paragraph for each one of those things, identify it, and then list some exercises or resources that they could use to get to it.
Wow.
And it just kind of grew from there. And, I think word got around that if you wanted to get a response from Marvel, send it to my office. I got more of these things than anybody else. But it was a lot of work. It was like editing another book or two, because I tried every day before I went home to make sure I went through the days, submissions, and some days there were a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, it paid off. I mean, obviously the names, and there's many others: Terry Shoemaker, Steve Skarosh, Larry Stroman. I mean, a lot of people who kind of credit you as the person who kind of found them. I mean, I don't know, it was about a year or two ago. Well, more than that now with the pandemic. But a couple of years ago, I remember Art Adams being asked kind of what would be one of the most valuable things a comic company could do, and saying, get Carl Potts back in the company because find the talent. So I mean that's
nice. I'll have to thank him next time I see him.
Yeah, just a tremendous portfolio of work, in addition to all these things you've written, and I just find that fascinating, and it does seem like that may be lost today as a kind of that back and forth. Yeah, when I joined Marvel, there were a number of people on staff who were editors who also had art backgrounds, including Milgram, Budiansky, Hama, Archie Goodwin. His stuff was mostly cartoony, but he was an excellent visual storyteller. He'd often, with his scripts, do thumbnails for the artists. And there's probably others that I'm free. Grunwald mostly wrote, but he also drew that Hawkeye miniseries.
Yeah. It would have been, I think his 68th birthday yesterday as of the recording here. Do you have any, Mark Grunwald stories from like The Office? Because everyone seems to have really fond memories of him that got to work with him.
Mark, during, when he got there in the late 70s, I came on board in early 83. And Mark had already been there for a while. I'd known him from social gatherings and so on, but hadn't really worked with him. But until he died in 96, he was basically a personification of Marvel's heart and soul. He lived, breathed, walked, talked, everything comics, particularly Marvel. And he loved what he was doing. And he was always having fun around the office and getting other people involved. He would, a lot of us working in comics are introverts by nature. So he would, at conventions, he'd because it was Mark and we all like Mark, we didn't want to disappoint him. He would corral us to do the stupidest stuff at conventions. making fools of ourselves, like these contests. He called them the Marvel Olympics, where it would be Marvel staffers and creators versus the fans on stage doing stupid, exercises and things. They even did balloon using your butt to bust balloons, and how many balloons you could bust at the same time. And he would even get Tom DeFalco, Vice President, Editor-in-Chief of Marvel, sitting on balloons on his stage, busting them with his butt, because we all just, Mark's enthusiasm was infectious, and we also didn't want to disappoint him, because he was just like so into that stuff. He and Tom had an interesting going where they would play. They'd never talk about it, but they would play practical jokes on each other, and it was never mentioned. So, like, Tom would go out of the office for a weekend for a convention trip or something, and he'd come back, and his office would look the same, but after a while, he'd notice that all the books were in the exact opposite order in the bookshelves that he left them in. And, just stuff like that. But it was fun. We, Mark, one time when I was away, I had an assistant Joanne, who 3 other male assistants all had crushes on. And all throughout the day, I'm trying to work in my office, and one of those assistants would come in and be talking and visiting with her, and so she's not getting any work done. And as soon as that one left, another one would come in. I feel like another one. So it's all day long. So every once in a while, I'd look up and say, "Joanne, let's get back to work." And that would be the hint for the assistant editors to take a powder, but then the other ones would come in. If I sent her to out of the office to make Xeroxes or something like that, then they'd go follow her there. So anyhow, Joanne, get back to work became sort of a catchphrase. And, when I was out of the office one time, Mark took this portrait of me that Brent Anderson had drawn, and we did a word balloon on it, and it wrote, "Joanne, get back to work on it." And when I was away and Joanne was in the office, she thought she was going to get in trouble for this, but I thought it was hilarious. They papered every surface I had with these Xeroxes. Like, there was a glass wall on my office and all those editorial offices out into the bullpen, and that whole thing was thoroughly covered. All the interior walls, the flat files. I even had they had these light fixtures that were recessed into the ceiling. You had to take apart to change the bulbs. I got in there and put them in there. There was a pterodactyl mobile I had on, and that was wearing one of these things. And so I ended up taking pictures of it. I had to take the ones off the front of the flat files off because I had to get some work done. But I left as many of the other ones up as I could for a long time. That's the kind of stuff I had. One time when Ralph Macchio was away, there was an editor up at DC, an artist, writer, Ernie Colon. I don't know if
Yeah.
And he kind of got infamous for writing pretty volatile letter column responses. And I guess they let him go at some point. So when Ralph was gone one weekend, they, Mark and his crew, went in there, totally rearranged the office, took some of the furniture out, replaced it with others, and had a half-typed letter in the IBM Selectric that Ralph had. That was done in the voice of Ernie Colon writing a horrible response to some fan letter for one of Ralph's books. so Ralph walks in, and the idea was that he thought he'd been replaced by Ernie Colon. But Ralph knew Mark too well.
That's what you're describing sounds like a very fun office. It sounds like you're obviously everybody's working very hard, but it also seems like I don't know. There's a camaraderie there. Is that?
Oh yeah, it's like anywhere else. There's some people you like more than others, and there's one or two that don't get along.
Sure.
The vast majority of the people I really enjoyed, and we would socialize as well out of the office. But Mark kind of inspired me one time. not too long after Jim Shooter was let go and Tom DeFalco came in, for the latter part of Shooter's reign, the office had a very kind of depressing mood about it. It was, and all of that fun stuff had gone away that had been done before. So I decided to try and bring it back. And being an avid fisherman, I brought in my collapsible travel rod into the office with a reel with a very thin, almost invisible monofilament. And we were on the 10th floor, and it was a strange New York office building because these windows actually opened, which most of them don't. So I went into Ralph Macchio's office, and we put the pole together and opened the window. And Ralph had this little 6-inch tall DC dark side figure, and it had this little prism-like thing on the top of his head. It would collect light, and his eyes would glow red.
Oh, nice.
And so we had dark side dangling out the 10th floor window down onto the sidewalk. So he's kind of walking along, hopping along next to the pedestrians, and they're looking at him. Every once in a while, someone would try and grab him, and we could just jerk him up with the pole, and he would like disappear because there was an awning down there. We just drag him on top of the awning, and it was like, where the hell did he go? So, we had fun with that, and then some of the Marvel people that were coming and going, and they saw this going on, and most of them thought it was great. But one of them was the office manager at the time, who was very strict and wasn't really in the in the same mindset as the rest of us. So she thought what I was doing, Ralph and I were doing, was just horrible, and she went up and complained to the publisher, Mike Hobson. Most people who read comics back then don't know Mike Hobson, but he was our publisher, the real hands-on publisher. And he wasn't much for getting his name in the lights or anything, but he was a great boss, great professional.
Yeah.
So Mike, I didn't know Mike well at that time. I got to know him really well later, but he comes down, sticks his head in Ralph's office, and I'm the one that happens to have the pole out the window at that point. Ralph's actually taking a call and doing business. And so Ralph tries to throw me under the bus. Mike opens the door, and Ralph said the phone, and he kind of goes to me, and he kind of shrugs and like that. So, but Hobson knew Ralph too well to believe that. So he goes, "Boys, what are you doing?" So I reeled in the pole and took it apart like that, and I knew Mike said something about he was going to go down and talk to my immediate boss, Tom DeFalco, about it, the new boss. So I expected I was going to get called down there and chewed out at some point during the rest of the day. And, well after I kept waiting around, it was 5 o'clock, came and went, didn't hear from Tom to come down. So somewhere 5:36, I decided to go down there. And I said, "Tom, is there something you want to talk to me about?" He goes, "No, what?" And I go, "Didn't Hobson come down here?" And Tom goes, "Oh, yeah, he came in, closed the door, and in a very gruff voice said, 'You know what those guys are doing?'" Tom said, "Who?" And he goes, "Potts and Macchio." And as he started to try and recall it, he started howling with laughter. And to me, that meant that, that kind of spark that we used to have at Marvel was coming back, and we had the right people in charge now. And that whole atmosphere was returning.
Yeah. Nice. It's funny because I've read a lot of comics. Recently going back, where it started while Shooter was there, and then kept going. The run would keep going, like Grunwald on Cap, and you can almost see over the course of like a few months, like Kieran Dwyer's like art on that book. It seemed like it got more dynamic. Like there was like the editorial directives must have been changing and all of that on how the art could come across in the stories. Did you notice things like that happening in the transition?
I think you're giving too much credit for us being organized in some strategic way. A lot of it was flying by the seat of your pants.
Sure.
Gotcha.
But there were things that started happening, like when the first Secret Wars came along and was very, very successful. And that required doing all of these crossovers, which was a huge organizational headache. And so, of course, that had to be repeated, and more crossovers started happening and that sort of thing. So, we all worked to do those as best as we could, but there were times when it just became, you're trying to do certain arcs on your own books, and now you're told you've got to slip in this, that, or the other thing to coordinate with some other stuff, and it was a little frustrating. And the scheduling was weird too. It's like I worked real hard to keep my books on the idealized production schedule. That way, if there was no chance they would miss shipping, and if something did go wrong, like one of the creators on the book had an illness or a death in the family or something, there's something always going on somewhere. If you got 5 people on a book, at some point someone's going to have problems. So, but that gave me some wiggle room to try and jiggle the schedule to still keep them going, or if I had to replace somebody for a while, I could find the best person possible and give them enough time to do a good job, as opposed to, draw me 22 pages in 4 days, kind of thing. So, but that's why I ran my office in that first Secret Wars. No, maybe it was the second one. They all run together now.
Yeah.
With current events too, as it turns out.
But I was editing the Hulk, and I already had an issue totally done in the drawer, ready to go to the printer. And I was told, hold on, you have to do a Secret Wars crossover. You got to take out a few pages and add a few pages that have this going on in it. And it's like, and because Secret Wars was running so late, it screwed up everybody else's schedules. So in that regard, hopefully not too much of that showed to the fan base out there, but internally it caused a lot of tension and problems.
Yeah.
So you went through the transition of working with Shooter. You just mentioned working for DeFalco.
I was hired by Shooter, yeah.
Yeah, you hinted at it already, but so there was you did, of course, notice a very distinct style change between the two.
Yeah, but, Shooter, when I started working there, I'd heard stories from a number of people that he could be very difficult and so on, but I'd always gotten along with him. I'd known him from, the social gatherings of the comics community. And I'd always gotten along with him. And I'd had no plans whatsoever to be an editor. I was fine being an artist and a writer. But he called me up out of the blue one day and said, Milgram is going to go freelance, and I don't think any of my current crop of assistant editors are ready to promote yet. Would you be interested? And so I started thinking about it, and I decided to give it a shot. And, I had heard the stories of him being difficult at times, but initially I had no issues at all with them. I could have really good conversations with him, even about things we disagreed on. And so, but over time, it seemed like his attitude changed. He used to brag that he'd put together the best editorial team in the history of comics. And then later on, he seemed to feel all of us were clueless bozos that needed to be led by the hand. And I don't know what flipped that switch, but that's how he started acting, and it was extremely difficult to work with him. And people that, didn't work well with him or just couldn't tolerate it, either quit or he would fire them. And we lost some really good people that way.
Yeah.
And so it just got to be like very depressing around the office. It was there was a dark thundercloud hanging overhead. And you knew at some point lightning was going to strike, but you didn't know when, and you didn't know who was going to get hit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because that seems to be, based on, stories that you hear with Jim doing interviews and things like that, that this was kind of like how Mort Weitsinger ran things over at DC, where he seemed to chew out people and then go off and tell other people at gatherings, I've got the best people, and Jim and Carrie Bates and these guys are phenomenal, and then would proceed to turn around and chew them out and stuff like that. It's interesting, just sort of correlating that.
Yeah, I don't know if he was using that experience as his role model or not. I don't know enough about that relationship between him and Weitsinger, and I don't want to, project too much.
Of course, yeah.
But it's strange that it went from being someone who I could really have a really nice, easygoing conversation with, even about stuff we didn't always agree on, to somebody that it's just it's like you're walking on light bulbs, with them.
It is. I've heard people describe it as there were two phases to that tenure and I've heard other people mention the same, that there's like a part one and a part two to what it was like, and that transition. And nobody's been able to really kind of identify what happened to go from part one to part two. But eventually, DeFalco takes over.
Yeah, and it was like a breath of fresh air. Tom is the best boss I've ever had. And I didn't always agree with him. In fact, he did some stuff that I really didn't agree with. But I knew that if we didn't agree on something, he would give me every chance to make my case, and I had an honest shot at changing his mind. If I didn't, and he decided to go in another direction, he knew that even if I didn't like it, I was a pro. I wouldn't half-ass it. I'd do whatever I could to try and make whatever he wanted to be successful.
Yeah.
To me, that's the ideal relationship you want to have with the people you work with and for.
Oh, for sure.
So
definitely.
So that was fabulous. And like I said, his boss, publisher Mike Hobson, I got along with great as well. I ended up working with him more closely as I got promoted. So it went back to being Marvel again.
Yeah. And when I think it was, Tom had taken the reins by the time you were doing stuff like Punisher War Journal, I believe, right?
I believe I'd already started that. Yeah.
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 So what was it about? Like, how did that come about? Were you the one who was, pushing the idea of doing more with Punisher? Was that like a top down to you? How'd that go?
Not initially. It was bottom up in a way. I can't remember if it was Joe Duffy who approached me first for that Punisher graphic novel, the first one, Assassin's Guild, whether it was Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck who approached me with the miniseries idea. But they were both being done simultaneously for a long time. I can't remember which one started first, but I remember when I got approached by Grant and Zeck. I'd always loved Zeck's work. And Grant, I'd read some of his stuff, and not a lot of it, and what I'd read hadn't really impressed me yet, but I really liked his take on the character and the proposal. So I agreed to champion it through the approvals process. And a lot of the other editors thought, there's no way this is ever going to work. This guy is like an anti-hero at best. He isn't a mutant. He doesn't have powers. uses real world weaponry, not some neat, fantastic stuff. But I thought there might be a market for it because of what was happening in other parts of popular media. For instance, the films, you had the Dirty Harry movies and the Charles Bronson Death Wish movies and so on. Yeah. So decided to give it a go, and lo and behold, it turned out to be a humongous hit. And so then I started an ongoing monthly series, and I kept having all these ideas for stories for the character, but no place to put them because I had Mike Barron on the regular book at that point, and Barron, was a fountain of ideas. He didn't need me feeding him stuff. So
yeah, that's right.
The character got so popular, and at that point there were some characters, like particularly Spider-Man, that you had multiple titles for that single character. Yeah. So I proposed doing a Punisher War Journal. The major difference between that and the regular Punisher book, I felt, would be that Barron's stories are pretty much, you see the character almost totally from the outside. You don't really get to peer inside what's going on internally with them. And even like when Microsoft's son was killed, all you see is him holding the body and delivering him to microchip. You don't really go into what his thoughts are. So I was going to use the actual War Journal captions to go more into his internal workings as well. And I'd never been able to draw a monthly book, or just not fast enough. But I figured if I wrote this and did the layouts for it, and it was on a 6-week schedule, I could probably pull that off. So it started out on a 6-week schedule. But it got to be a hit so quickly that the sales department was demanding it go monthly. So after I laid out 5 of the first 7 issues, Jim didn't need me or anybody else doing layouts for him. So I said, all right, screw it, go monthly. I'll just write the damn thing, and I forget trying to do the layouts for it. So that's what happened there on that one.
I mean, so yeah, kind of as you just mentioned, you wind up doing the layouts for this, and this is Jim Lee, and this would be Jim Lee's kind of breakout at Marvel.
Yeah, though he'd been drawing Alpha Flight for me for about a year, I guess. He at that point, when he started out, was going to Princeton. I think it was pre-med. I'm not 100% sure.
I think so.
But he came with some samples to a New York convention. I think it was at the Roosevelt Hotel, but he was so shy about showing them. He didn't show them until after the convention was closing down. And I'd already left, and the only Marvel editor left there was Archie Goodwin. So he showed it to Archie, and Archie said, you should show this Carl. He likes working with the new guys. So Jim ended up, I don't know if he was skipping class or not, but Monday he came up to the office and showed me his work. And I would give people who I thought had promise a 6-page tryout story that Tom DeFalco had written called Double Vision, which crams a hell of a lot of story into 6 pages. It was trial by fire, throwing them in the deep end of the pool to see if they could pull it off with the storytelling and so on.
Nice.
And at one point, I had a whole stack of these things done by all these different people. Then during one of the office moves, all those pages disappeared. I wish I had them now.
Oh, man.
But anyhow, so Jim did a really nice job on that. And fairly soon after that, I needed an artist on Alpha Flight. So I put him on that. And every issue he started growing in leaps and bounds. And I didn't plan to have him on War Journal. I was happy with them on Alpha Flight, and War Journal, as a creator, I couldn't edit it. So it was being edited in another office. And I didn't, I would basically be stealing from myself. Jim was on there. So, but I was talking to Jim on the phone one day. He was living out in California at the time, and we were talking about Alpha Flight. And I mentioned to him that, I was going to be laying out this Punisher book, and I'd been searching around for the right person to do the finishes. And I wasn't fishing or anything like that. I was just telling him what I was up to. And he goes, oh, I'd be into that. And I thought, well, no fool I, I'll be happy to do that. So I ended up finding somebody else for Alpha Flight.
That was the time where you're right. His style was growing dramatically from month to month. I remember he did the Alpha Flight issues. He did that Solo Avengers story with Mockingbird. I think there was a couple smaller things that he was doing. I think he did something in what the.
Yeah, a little later, he actually did an issue of one of the epic titles that Archie Goodwin created for the Dark. What was it? Shadowline series of books.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Busy guy.
Yeah, no, for sure. But Punisher War Journal definitely was the breakout. And kind of again, Joe and I were talking about this as well. And we're kind of curious to get your take on it. What do you do with a Punisher today? If is it about every Joe, you were saying about every 6 months this comes up, right?
Yeah, there's pushback on characters like the Punisher in a way that's not proportionate to other anti-heroes. It's like, people will be condemning the Punisher, and then they'll be like, I can't wait for the next issue of Lobo to come out. And, it's interesting. So
it's a weird character. I have a love-hate relationship with the character because my take on the character was that Frank Castle was traumatized and has also tremendous guilt for failing to protect his family from this mob rub out. So he is out there to track down and kill violent criminals for a couple of reasons. I think the conscious one is that he wants to prevent what happened to him and his family from happening to others. But I think at least semi-consciously, if not totally subconsciously, he has his own death wish. He could have been called the Punished and refer to Castle. He knows at some point he's going to be killed or maimed if he keeps up this lifestyle. And he'll get what he deserves for failing to protect his family. And nothing he does, no matter how many bad guys he takes down, any of the stuff, brings him any joy. He doesn't crack a beer and put his feet up and go, hey, I did great on that. Nothing brings him joy. And he's just obsessed with on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. And that was my take on the character. And I felt that, the audience, would enjoy the action. They'd also enjoy a bit of the catharsis, I guess, of seeing, really bad people that sometimes in real life get away with things and don't get caught or don't go to prison, get their, at least in pictorial literature, get their comeuppance.
Right.
But it wasn't meant to be, to me, like a role model or someone to be admired or anything like that. But once in a blue moon, I'd get a letter from somebody. This is back when people wrote letters. And it'd say, oh, I love the Punisher. I want to be just like him. I'd have to stop what I was doing and write them back and tell them, you're not getting it. This guy is miserable. He's not happy. He usually just either gets involved with or creates ongoing cycles of violence. He never solves any long-term problems. And he's miserable. Why on earth would you want to be like this?
Right.
Plus, in real life, you don't have the luxury of saying that no innocent bystanders get hurt like you can in the comic. Because there's no way any of that stuff would happen in real life without a bunch of people, bystanders, getting creamed in the process. And but after I got promoted to executive editor, the executive editors weren't allowed to line edit books anymore. They oversaw groups of editors.
Oh.
And so I had to give up all the books I was line editing. And the Punisher went to the editor who had been doing War Journal, and I didn't think this editor had a feel for the character at all. As a matter of fact, in the early issues of War Journal, I really wanted editorial input, and I got none initially from this editor, and I wanted it, so I would give my plots to Ralph Macchia to read. So Ralph Macchio would give me feedback, and he was the real story editor on those early War Journal issues. He was uncredited. But so anyhow, this editor, to me, there was some good stuff with the character came out of his office, but there's also a lot of stuff where they jerked the character around in ways that I thought went against the vision I felt was the right vision for the character. They, had him. It was established at some point that he was a member of the NRA, and that he built a torture chamber into his warehouse, which makes no sense on multiple levels. Even if he was going to torture people, which he shouldn't, why take them back to your secret hiding place to do it? Just in case something happens and goes wrong. It just makes...
I remember that. That was very weird. That would be like Batman, building a little kind of torture chamber in the Batcave. And
it was just, and also that in his downtime. First off, the Punisher never has downtime. He's totally obsessed. But in his downtime, he goes bear hunting.
Right.
Oh, God. To me, it was just,
criminal bears, though.
They didn't have a real feel for what was going on. And with the character, and I think a lot of that has to do with how the character eventually lost, its popularity, and just eventually dried up and disappeared for a long time.
Yeah. Do you think that concept? I think to make the Punisher work, you have to. It's funny. Maybe the society's dumbed down to some extent, but there's some nuance to the Punisher, and I think what you're describing is kind of that depth to the character, the nuance to his mission, the fact that there's multiple layers being explored there. In 2021, do you think the audience, the industry, do you think is it now too late to tell that story properly?
Hopefully not, but I don't know. I almost feel like they should shut the character down for a while and let things go up. I mean, there were other things that were happening associated with the character that I just thought were horrible. There were police departments using the skull symbol.
Right.
I do not want my police associating themselves with a vigilante figure.
Right.
It's bad enough when some military units did it, but that's not as bad as the police doing it in my book anyway.
No.
But I found it troubling that, they would hold up as an ideal this vigilante who is totally obsessed and doesn't follow the rules and goes against the law and so on. Why would I want my police to, have that symbol representing them?
It did seem like a miss on the character, and unfortunately, that's the stuff that now is out in kind of the pop culture. So when you see the conversations going around about the Punisher as a character, when people are debating, well, should this character be retired for good, they often point to the police using the symbol and other things, which is just taking us further and further away from that core character you were describing at the beginning.
Yeah, that's why I think it might be good just to, at least for 5, if not more years, just to retire the character and then maybe try it again with that original take I had, or the take I was using, or maybe someone else would come up with another take that will be easier to manage and control, manage people's expectations and so on. One of the things I should mention is that I think Archie Goodwin doesn't get enough credit for helping popularize the character, because early on in his appearances in the color comics and Spider-Man and so on, he was, not really someone to be taken seriously in a lot of ways. But Archie Goodwin wrote 2 stories that were in black and white magazines for Marvel, 2 separate magazines, but he kind of reestablished the character there as, somewhat more gritty and serious and pseudo-realistic. And I think that is what definitely informed Jo Duffy and her take, because she was a good friend of Archie's and worked with Archie at the Epic offices. But I also think that's what inspired Miller during his Daredevil run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And those are the things that also, I think, inspired Stephen Grant. And so I don't think Goodwin gets enough credit for kind of revamping the character in a way that eventually is what made him popular.
Yeah. Do you have any fun little Archie Goodwin stories? He's someone else we lost way too young.
Yeah.
Archie Goodwin was the most universally respected and liked writer-editor in the business when he was alive. And I'll tell you a couple stories about him. My second day in New York, I fly out from New York, and I don't really know anybody, but I'd met Jim Starlin, who had moved to the West Coast, and gotten to know him a bit. And I told him I was going to move to New York and try and break in. And he asked me if I knew anybody in New York. I said no. It was just naive. I had no idea. I'd never even moved out of home when I went to college. I was closing. So he goes, let me make a call. So he calls up, sharing an apartment out in Forest Hills, Queens, are Al Milgram and Walt Simonson. He calls him up and goes, if this kid comes out there, can he crash there until he gets his feet under him? They said, sure. And living in that same building are Howard Chaykin and Bernie Wrightson. So I go out to New York and I'm hanging out with these guys. I was just like, oh my goodness, it was nuts. But then Starlin would occasionally come back to New York to line up his next batch of work or talk with the editors about what he was planning and so on. I think he just liked coming to New York once in a while. He just didn't want to live in it.
Understand that.
He decided to time one of his trips out there around the same time I went out there. So my second day in New York, he takes me into the Marvel offices and introduces me around, show my work to some of the editors. And first editor I showed my work to was Archie Goodwin, who at that point was overseeing all the black and white comics. And I'd been, the year before, I'd been constantly sending out these unsolicited samples, Xeroxes of my work to companies, and hardly ever getting a response back or a really late one. So I'm showing Archie my portfolio. Starlin's introduced me, and he finds this piece I'd done, this science fiction piece. He goes, I could use this for an ad, a subscription ad for the science fiction magazine. I'll buy this. It was a pencil piece, and he had Simonson ink. But while he's buying this thing from me, his assistant or secretary came out with this stack of submissions that were being rejected with the letters that had been typed up for Archie to sign. So as he's buying one piece from me, he's signing my all these rejection letters. You realize he's reached mine, and he ends up handing it to me from my samples out there with a big smile on his face. But he, at one point, some of the editors played kind of fast and loose with the time they came into the office. They were all, hardworking people for the most part. So like Ralph Macchia and Archie often came in much later than anybody else, but they often also stayed much later. But they would get in trouble once in a while with the upstairs folks for that. So the upstairs folks tried to do what do they call it? It's the stick and the carrot.
Carrot and the stick. Yep.
So they said if you get in on time, we're going to provide free bagels in the morning of the Saturday. But if you come in after 9:30, no bagels for you, and you get in trouble. So everyone was worried about Archie because he, came in pretty late. So the first day this was instituted, it was the spread with the bagels and all that was pretty much in front of where Archie's office was. And Archie's office, the doors closed, no lights on. This guy, they're thinking, oh my God. And they were watching the clock as it's ticking down. And just after the deadline time comes, Archie's door opens. He's in his pajamas and he yawns. He goes, oh. He'd gotten in super early to pull that joke off.
I'd love, hopefully somewhere. I mean, there's photos of all this stuff. I mean, the get back to work.
Some of it, but not all of it. At one point, I don't know if it'll ever happen. DeFalco, myself, Fabian Nicieza, and then when they were alive, Jim Galton, who was the president of the company during the good times, and Mike Hobson, we were all going to work on a book on what it was like to work at Marvel during, the 80s through the mid 90s when everything went away. And so we started collecting a lot of material for that, but we never got around to doing it.
That would have been great. I hope that would be a project to somehow get done somehow.
Well, at one point I thought about maybe switching it over to a documentary, because like these documentaries that have been on places like Netflix and all that seem to be pretty popular. But I haven't run into the right producer yet. Or
Disney Plus, they've been doing stuff with Marvel, and I think the person who produced or was working on it, that did the Marvel one with Dan Slott, actually used to be an editor at Marvel, and like got promoted into sort of the TV division. So there might be ways to do something like that, because that sounds like the kind of content that I think just enough time's passed. Like there's a lot working in favor of something like that.
Yeah, although if people are looking for all the dirt, though, the idea generally was to try and concentrate on the good stuff.
Yeah.
To show how it wasn't a total accident that the best publishing period, the most profitable publishing period, and one with a lot of creative breakthroughs in Marvel's publishing history, happened during the periods when it had the best corporate culture.
Yeah.
When those changed, everything went in the toilet.
But that's a story that should be told. I mean, I want to now take some time off, and Joe and I can travel around with a microphone and interview people if necessary. But that is a fascinating story, because people are looking for work-life balance and corporate culture, and how real creativity happens, and what you're describing, kind of the fun of just either people pulling pranks or fishing out the window or whatever it happens to be. That is. Well, we have lost that.
Yeah, and now if I go up to Marvel, well, they haven't had anything on going up there with the pandemic. But before that, if I was going to go up there and meet somebody, usually it'd be to go out to lunch. I am held in the outside entry area until the person I've come to see comes and collects me, walks me back to their office, and then we're done. I have to be escorted out.
Right.
And that's it for pretty much everybody up there that isn't on staff. And when I was there, if you managed to get into the editorial office somehow, you pretty much could talk to anybody you wanted. And it's like John Bogdanov got his start because he'd come up to see one editor and show his samples to, and the editor didn't have anything for him. So he came in to see me, and I happened to be talking to Louise Simonson at the time. We were trying to figure out who to try and get to replace June Brigman on Power Pack, because she was moving on to other things. And there aren't that many people in comics who draw convincing kids.
Yeah, very true.
So I'm looking, John Bogdanov comes in and asks if he can show his work. So he shows his work, and it's nice, but it's nothing I really need at that point. And then as I'm closing his portfolio out of the side pocket, this piece of paper falls out that's got sketches of his neighbor's kids on it. And I go, that I can use. And Wheezy loved it too, and that's how John got his start. But that's the kind of thing that happened all the time up there. If you were a writer or an artist or whatever, a creator at some point, you could hang out there, talk to people. Sometimes you'd end up accidentally brainstorming whole stories or series, things like that, because you have all these creative people mixing it up, which is how you come up with creativity. A lot of creativity is juxtaposing things together in new and interesting ways. And if you have the right people brainstorming, it can be a joy to do work that way. So there was a lot of that going on, but these days, everything is very uptight and regulated.
I mean, it's like going into an insurance office or a kind of small tech company. I've been to Marvel's offices a few times. Unfortunately, I never got to see it back in the old days. So the only world I know is that tiny kind of outer room, and then guided. Yeah.
When it was on Park Avenue at 387 Park Avenue South, they would do tours once a week. I think it was on Fridays or something. I can't remember. And this was another Grunwald thing. He decided that he wanted to make it look like we were factory workers. So he bought us all red jumpsuits and hard hats and would name things on the jumpsuits. And back then they were putting out these licensed embroidered patches of different characters. So some of us would sew those on for the characters we edited on the arm. So for a while there, every Friday we had to get in these red jumpsuits and put on our hard hats and pretend that that's what our everyday working uniform was for the fans that were being shown through the office. I don't know what happened to my jumpsuit and hard hat. I wish I still had it. I'm not sure I'd fit in the jumpsuit anymore, though.
Again, I've got to find some photos of some of this stuff. Tell me, so you wind up your comics. You work. I was just kind of looking over the list here. You mentioned Alpha Flight earlier, obviously Punisher War Journal, but you wind up. You edited the Hulk. You edited the Defenders.
Yeah, I basically inherited Al Milgram's line, with the exception of Fanfare, which he continued to edit on a freelance basis. Yeah,
and you mentioned Power Pack already. Strike Force Moratori, which is a cult classic now for sure.
Yeah, that. Believe it or not, when Shooter came up with the idea for the new universe, the concept was different. It was new titles that weren't associated with Marvel in any way and didn't have to be coordinated with each other. They could be in different universes.
Oh.
So Peter Gillis approached me with the Moratori concept, and I liked it. And I showed it to Brent Anderson, and he got really interested in it. And then I kept hearing about being these editorial meetings with Shooter and the editors working on new universe titles, but I was never invited. So stories started getting out, though, of how difficult it was working with Shooter on the new universe books. So one day I went down there and asked him what was happening with Moratori, because for all I knew, it had been canceled and no one had bothered to tell me. So he goes, no, we changed the new universe, so now it's all this coordinated stuff. So Moratori will just come out as a regular Marvel book, which at that point, from all the stories of people working on the new universe stuff, we all breathed a sigh of relief.
That's you also I mentioned earlier, but What The? You were overseeing What The as well, which is
I grew up like with the original Marvel self-parody book, Not Brand Deck.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, I loved that, and so I had I proposed at an editorial meeting that we bring that back, at least try a 4-issue miniseries, which were all the rage at the time, and see if there was a market for it. And then there was another editor who said, "Oh, I was going to suggest the same thing," and so Shooter's, I guess he was playing Solomon. He goes, "Okay. Carl, you edit the first two, and the other editor edit the other two. And if it does well enough to keep going, whoever does the best books will be the editor." And I'm not particularly glib or funny, and the other person was more along those lines. So everybody assumed their books would be funnier. But I know I don't need to be funny. I need to know the funny people. I need to get them to work for me.
Exactly.
So I ended up being the long-term editor.
Yeah, it's funny. So I think there's a fondness for the 90s, or sorry, the 80s, certainly in the early 90s. But part of that fondness is for I don't know the best way to put it, but comics not taking themselves too seriously. I mean, it is funny to say it because you did have like Frank Miller doing very serious work and a lot of, but at the same time, there's lightheartedness, whether it was the Assistant Editors Month material or What The, but that dovetails with what you're telling me about the office culture being relaxed.
We were serious about what we were doing. We all loved it, grew up on it, and we wanted to make sure we're doing it right. But we all thought what we were doing was fun. It wasn't digging ditches, it wasn't pumping gas. It was having fun doing what we were doing. And
Yeah.
part of what we grew up with was the fact that the stuff that, Stan and Kirby and Ditko and so on did, there was always that current of fun in there somewhere, even in, serious storylines. And it was just a continuation of that sort of thing.
I know we've used about all of your time, but I did want to ask you one more, the big one that actually, and Joe, you were reading a comic. You had showed it earlier before we went on the air, I believe.
Sure. Yeah. No. What was it? Last of the Dragons. Yeah. Which we were talking a little off air about it, but that's kind of that was one of the first things you had published at Marvel, right?
Yeah. It was also the first property I created that got published, and it was published in Epic Illustrated, which was had a lot of creator-owned material at the time, so I retained the ownership of it, and I showed it to my. I was working at Continuity Studios, which was run by Neil Adams and Dick Giordano at the time, and one of my office mates there was Terry Austin, who was rapidly becoming the most popular inker in the business at the time. And Terry liked my drawings on it and volunteered to ink it, which was fabulous. So after I had the first episode, I think, done, I took it into Archie Goodwin, who was editing Epic Illustrated, and he liked it and wanted to buy it. I asked him if he would script over my plot, and he said, nah, find somebody else. So I walked outside and ran into Denny O'Neil, who I'd met a few times before, and I showed it to him, and he goes, yeah, this looks good. I'll do that. And I talked to Marie Severn, who was in the bullpen, and I said, I need colors for this. Would this be of interest to you? And she really liked it, and she signed on. Same thing with letterer Jim Novak. And as I mentioned earlier to you guys, I was spoiled. I thought, this is how projects come together this easily. And nothing like that has ever come together that easily since. Yeah. But it's something that is near and dear to my heart. I recently revised, I'd done a while ago, a screenplay for it, and then I changed that into the pilot for an ongoing series. And I've tried pitching it a few times and some nibbles, but no bites yet. So we'll see if we're able to get that going.
Yeah, and a few years ago, what was it? Dover Press put out the collection, and it's still on Amazon. It's actually a little over 50% off on Amazon now, and they've only got 14 copies left in stock. So everyone listening, this better be sold out a few days after this goes up. Just
also, that Dover edition, unlike the original Epic collection, the Dover one, we added some more material in the back, and it's got more info on it. I also talk in there about Archie Goodwin, because I think a lot of today's fans have no idea who he was, and I think that's really sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I that's definitely a good deal. Sorry, I'm looking at it right now. It's a great price on it. There are now 13 left in stock. So
good.
Hurry up. No, I don't have this edition. This would be great. I along those lines, though, I was reading last night and kind of went down. I got buried in it, but I mean in a good way. I got immersed in it. Better way to put it. Alien Legion, which was absolutely one of my favorite books at the time, and kind of remains so. Just everything from the character design to the plot. And I know that there's some history. Maybe you can shine some light on where we're at with it now. But I know there was a lot of talk, at least, about converting it to a movie or a show or some medium, and it feels like that would be just a home run today.
Well, that's got a long history of being bounced around Hollywood, and it's still the case. But it's going to be very difficult to get that in front of the cameras at this point, because back, I think it was in 2006 6 or 7 or something like that, I optioned Alien Legion, and I'd written a screenplay for that. It was the first script I ever wrote, screenplay I wrote, and I optioned it to Jerry Bruckheimer, who was working with Disney at that point. And they proceeded to have half of Hollywood rewrite that screenplay over, I guess 14 years or something like that.
I hadn't realized how many people, when I looked this morning to just, I hadn't realized, like, you're right. It's a lot of people have taken a crack at that now.
Yeah, including David Benioff, who was working on Game of Thrones at the time. Turned out he was a huge Alien Legion fan growing up in Brooklyn. And between seasons of Game of Thrones, the busiest guy in Hollywood did 3 rewrites, and then they fired him. But as far as I can tell, there were at least 7, if not 8, rewrites done total. And
that's madness.
Then the deal lapsed. It had a time limit on it. The trouble is the contract also stated that if I set it up elsewhere, the deal has to include Disney being paid back for all the development costs.
Oh,
guess how much they racked up in development costs with all those rewrites.
Yeah, that's I've heard of projects getting sunk that way.
Yeah, and so every time we've come close to making a deal, like I had Tim Miller attached to a couple of deals to direct it. He's another one that says he loves Alien Legion, and was pestering me to work with me on that in a very pleasant way before he'd done Deadpool. And he'd show me the reels of his stuff was doing, and I was blown away. I just thought, why on earth isn't this guy directing feature films yet? So he finally got Deadpool out there. But before that, when I would mention Tim Miller to people like the folks at Bruckheimer's, they only felt they could, entrust it to somebody who was a much more established person. And I would have been very happy to go with Tim there. He had the chops to do it. He had the enthusiasm and the knowledge. But anyhow, so it's had, at one point before that, there was a TV deal at MGM, and then Bob Gale wrote the script for that, and then MGM shut down their TV division. It was a feature film at Dimension Films for a while. Then the president that bought it left, and the new president, when these things happen, don't want to be associated with their predecessors' projects, so that went away. It's going to be at Mainframe, which did 3D animation. They did the original reboot and a bunch of stuff after that. But every time we get somebody interested now, and they're interested, then they have to try and deal with Disney and about this debt issue, and Disney has not been flexible enough to make it worth their while.
Yeah. Though, going back to some of the stuff you talked about earlier with like the Punisher, and your sort of clear vision on the Punisher that's sort of been abandoned for a while now, like you could probably whip up a creator-owned, a screenplay or something like that on a character more in line with that. You have stuff like John Wick, which is hugely popular, and that kind of character has been kind of getting more of a renaissance lately. So, like, that might be interesting to.
Well, I've thought about writing another space property that I have in mind that would have a similar, very diverse cast of aliens and so on. But the people that have been champions for it, there's a producer, Don Murphy, who has done a lot of stuff, comics related stuff too. He's been a big fan for a long time. We pitched it recently to the head of 20th Century, which is owned by Disney now, hoping again that since it was all part of the Disney family, then that would deal with the debt issue. Yeah. And it turned out that he this is making me feel old. He too grew up reading Alien Legion and was familiar with the property, loved it. But his bosses at Disney didn't want to go for it at this point. I think a lot of people felt that when Disney bought Star Wars and Marvel and Guardians of the Galaxy came out, that would be a big plus for Alien Legion. But it's the opposite thing, that they think things like, oh, we have a space property or multiple space properties with a bunch of aliens in it. We don't need another one.
Yeah.
It's that kind of pseudo logic that is, I think, is total BS.
Yes. Yes.
When I was editing Doctor Strange, Bob Gale had written a Doctor Strange script that some studio was hot to go to. This would have been like in the mid '80s, hot to go to film for, and I read it, and it was really faithful. It was very good. I think I had one comment. That was it. But then I didn't hear anything about it for a long time. And then I found out years later what happened is that right after that, the first of the Eddie Murphy movies that bombed, he'd been like a box office golden boy for a long time. But then The Golden Child came out, and it bombed. And the only thing that the people running the studio could figure out why that happened is that what was different about this one? Oh, there was magic in it. So magic doesn't sell. Let's kill the Doctor Strange project. And I tell people, what would have happened if J.K. Rowling had walked in there and pitched Harry Potter? They would have told her, get out of here, magic doesn't sell.
Yeah.
Well, and you weren't going to top the, what was it, the 1978 made-for-TV Doctor Strange movie, so...
Yeah, that's the way to top that.
It's if you haven't seen Alien Legion, if you're listening to this, there are omnibus available that you can pick up. You can get your hands on these, and there really is an incredible series. And you worked with Larry Stroman on that. You had
that's where you got to start. Yeah,
Terry Shoemaker was there, I think.
Frank Sirocco started out.
Yes,
and Chris Warner got started that way as well.
And then you had the spinoff, or where I think Chuck Dixon was writing. I think not a spinoff, but a sequel, so to speak, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of people who worked on that book. I was so busy, I didn't have time to do a lot of the creative work myself. I came up with the concept, helped put together a Bible with some help from Alan Zelnitz on that, who made some nice contributions. And then since then, I just I hire the people and I oversee the work, and I often come up with storylines and so on. But the actual hands-on work, I have done not a whole lot of that for a very long time. It's just, it's weird. Some properties that I dream up, I feel I've got the ultimate vision. I got to do everything. And others I feel would be better if I created a sandbox and invited people into play. And that's what Alien Legion turned out to be.
Yeah. Well, it's a tremendous series, but I mean, everything you've worked on is incredible. And the time you spent at Marvel, Carl, I just want to thank you for spending this time with us today and walking us through some pretty awesome memories of kind of the comic industry.
Well, thanks. I have a lot of fun memories of my time in the industry, and I'm not totally done yet. I'm working on a couple of graphic novels for very long ones that should have been out already, actually. But I wrote 2 long graphic novels based on my family's experiences in the Philippines during World War II when they were prisoners of the Japanese.
Wow.
And, I've teamed up with Bill Reinhold on that, who's taking forever in a day to turn out pages. But when he turns them out, they're so gorgeous. He's doing them in ink wash, and then we scan them and turn them into sepia tones, so it has a real 40s look to it. Just stunning stuff. I just hope it comes out in my lifetime.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah.
So. And then I'm always working on screenplays here and there. Still trying to get one of them in front of the cameras. We'll see.
Yeah, but you've done some stuff in the video game
world.
Yeah.
I was a creative director at a Boulder, Colorado-based online entertainment company for a while, and they got involved with doing massively multiplayer 3D internet games when most people still only had 28K dial-up modems, and it was they were too far ahead of their time.
but everyone still plays them now. It's crazy how they were definitely way ahead, because that's makes a lot of money now.
So. MMO is subscription fees is the way to go.
They had their own proprietary software to deal with latency and lag. Like their biggest game was a World War II flight sim combat game, which I loved, called Fighter Race. And if I was playing with somebody, like occasionally I'd play with people on the other side of the planet. I remember one time playing with somebody in Korea, and if there's lag, they prioritize the information packets so that the most important stuff, like is where the plane is positioned and the trajectory of the bullets. And so you could get like this very, kind of staccato look in the visuals and all that, but they were keeping track of who was where and who was being hit, but it wasn't always a smooth experience. They did do chat back then, and they had these really bad translators for the chat. Like I remember the Korean guy was fighting, the chat translated into "Come to me, my foods," which I think was supposed to be "I'm going to eat you alive." But "Come to me, my foods," and I keep hoping I'll find a place somewhere to use that phrase.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. That reminds me of the late '80s X-Men arcade game with the horrible translations where pyro will burn you to toast and welcome to die and all that stuff. It's great.
Welcome to Die, a classic comic line.
I love that line so much.
Yeah. Well, Carl, thank you again very much for chatting with us for the last hour, and I hope we can. There's links in the description for where you can buy Carl's work on Amazon and check some of these things out. And thank you very much, and I hope we can catch up with you again real soon.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
You too.